You know, I think, I mean, in our family we had 5 kids, and I was the middle, and I was named after my father, but I wasn't a junior. He was very careful to give me a different middle name, and he told me later in life that, you know, he thought the junior thing was just overrated, and you know, I don't know what he meant by that. To this day, people think I'm Jim Jr., Jim Foley Jr. I'm really not. But he was a unique guy. Worked hard. You know, was involved in a number of different committees and hospital boards and things like that growing up. I don't recall that he ever missed a sporting event of any of us, a speech debate with any of us. I don't recall that he ever did. But he never was one to tell us where we ought to be in life or what we ought to become. He really did allow us to get there on our own and guide us. But he had a different relationship with all of us. With me, I think just because I was his namesake, per se, he was always careful. In the middle child, he was always careful to push me a little harder. That's my view. He was probably right. You know, I was probably a knucklehead most of my grade school and early high school, but he always treated each other differently, but it was always respectfully in terms of how he loved all of us. I mean, it just was always different. He always had a different relationship with all of us.
And how about your siblings? What kind of relationship do you have with them? You
know, we're still close to this day. You know, I have a younger sister who lives in Helena. I have a younger brother who lives in Helena. I have an older brother who lives in Boulder, Colorado. An older sister who lives in Yakima, Washington. But we're still close to this day. We probably talk to one another at least once a week, which I think is a little unusual. And most of it is just kind of family business or checking in. Now that my parents have passed away, but I think we're pretty close. Geographically, we're split up, but you know, my brother and sister come to the Grizz games, every home game. One from Yakima, one from Helena. I don't know how they do it, but you know, they're always seeking tickets, always want freebies. But I still think we're close today. I really do.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Music is oftentimes a big part of, you know, the Irish household. Did you have any kind of history with that at all?
You know, I didn't. I mean, music I grew up with was more big band music that my mother and father loved. I don't recall much Irish music or language being in our house much at all. I don't know there was any reason for that. It just didn't come up a lot. I just don't recall much of it except the big band music and things like. I mean, they always had music going, but it wasn't Irish music much. Mm-hmm. It really wasn't. I don't know if they didn't like it or what. I'm not sure. Or it was depressing to them, or I'm not really sure. But it never really was in our household much.
Okay. Do you have any? Is there any? If your folks are anything like mine, my mom tells the same story 1,000 times about her folks or her siblings. Or is there any of those stories that really kind of come to mind as the go-to story for your mom or your dad, actually?
You know, I think the one story that I always used to hear about that came out all the time, it was always pretty close to being the same, is I had an uncle, Gerald, and his last name was Driscoll. My grandmother was married before she married Danny O'Neill in Ireland, and her husband passed away over there. And so she had a son, Gerald Driscoll, who came over to Butte quite a number of years after they had come to Butte initially and started to have my mother and her siblings. And Gerald came over and became a fireman. And Gerald, I remember this even growing up, although he died when I was probably maybe 8 or 9 or 10 in that vicinity of cancer. Gerald had a drinking issue. And he would go on binges, and he would, you know, work as a fireman for a few days and then go on a binge, and then he wouldn't drink for 6 months, and then he would go on another binge. And one night, this is a story my mother and father used to always tell. My mother in particular would tell it because she experienced it. Is he got into a little brawl with the police who came to get him, and it included at the time the chief of police, and they put him in jail. And I don't know exactly what happened, but so I don't want to blame the police here. But he got beat up pretty good, and he was a big guy, about 6'5", about 220, and months and months after that, as the story gets told, the chief of police's car caught on fire. And it was one of those really small kind of engine fires that maybe at the time with those kinds of cars started. And my Uncle Gerald was on duty at the time and showed up with a truck, got called and showed up. And the story goes that as he got out of the truck and realized whose car it was. He remembered that the chief of police and his officers had taken him down and given him a little whipping some months earlier. And so what could have been done with a fire hose simply just put out this engine fire. My Uncle Gerald took out an axe and took it to the car and chopped it up pretty good, and the fire got put out. And really, to the day my mother and father died, they swore that was an accurate story. And I've never had anybody verify it, but as I think about my Uncle Gerald and his time in Butte, because he'd go on these binges, and he was pretty ugly when he'd go on these binges, it's probably accurate. And since then, I've always tried to verify it with some of the old firemen over there, and I've never really been able to do it. But it sounds, at that time, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, sounds plausible. It wouldn't go on today, but in those times it was plausible.
Sure.
He probably got away with it.
Probably. in Helena growing up.
When we were growing up, when my mother and father first came to Helena, my father was in Carroll College finishing up. They lived in what was called the Stewart Homes, which was subsidized housing down in what's called the 6th Ward District in Helena. And when they got out of that and my father got a job, it may have been in a gas station at the time, they moved to a place called Benton Avenue, which was up near the Civic Center, up near Carroll College. And it was a duplex, and they had one side and another family had another side, which is still there today. And then when I was born, shortly after I was born, about a year later, my father ended up purchasing a house over in front of the Capitol that my brother still lives in and owns, my little brother. And it was a magical place, as I've said before, in a neighborhood where everybody got to know one another. Times were different, I know that, but nobody worried about checking in or anything like that. Everybody always knew where everybody was in the neighborhood. But it allowed me some opportunities to make friends, lifelong friends, and we've kept the house in the family. When my mother and father passed away, we gave it to my little brother, and he's maintained it, maintained the same colors and everything, and it's still pretty cool to go back and know that that's still in the family. And I think my mother and father bought that home in 1955 for $15,000. I haven't a clue where they got that money, because he didn't have any money. And then he and my mother had 2 more children, and we were all raised in that house. So it was pretty nice.
Yeah. What was like an average Saturday for you as a kid? Do you remember any kind of running
around? An average Saturday that I remember growing up was my father, it seemed like forever, was involved in the city council. I don't think that's accurate, but it seemed like he was. But he was always a person who would take a couple of the kids down to a place called Higgins Bar, which is no longer there in Helena. It's burned down. And he would park, usually my brother and I, but it could have been my sister and I too, in the front, at mid-morning, and gets a hot dog and a milkshake, and he'd go in the back, not to drink, not to gamble, but he went back there with kind of the town folks who drove everything that went on in town and got information. And he'd be back there about an hour and come back out and say, well, let's go. And I don't think it helped him personally. I don't think it helped him in his business, in insurance business, anything like that. I just think it was a way of sharing information and figure out what was going on in town. And it was also a way to help drive policy in town and what kids were doing and things like that. So that's kind of was a typical Saturday that I remember growing up. And then as we got a little older, sports and other activities, skiing and golf and those kind of lifelong sports, we were always engaged in. But early on, I remember going to Higgins, and that became kind of not a watering hole issue, because it was a bar, but a place to go get information and to share information and have a cup of coffee. I don't ever remember going in the back, so I haven't a clue what went on back there. I mean, maybe they were drinking, I don't think so. And he would always come out after about an hour and say, well, let's go, we got to go back home.
So you spent a lot of time kind of with your brothers and sisters?
Oh, yeah, we did. My mother never worked really much when we were growing up, so she was always home when we came home from school. We would walk home from the Catholic school, because it was only about 10 or 11 blocks away, which was Bishop Gilmore at the time, and then turned into Helena Central. And she would always be there when we came home, which in today's world is almost unheard of. And so we just got by. We did a lot of stuff that didn't cost money at the time, and so Saturdays were always absorbed with stuff like that.
That's cool. And you mentioned some sports. Were you pretty into sports when you were younger? Or?
Well, I think all of us were. Although my sisters at the time, Title IX wasn't here, so they didn't have women's sports then. Mm-hmm. But my brothers and I were always active in sports. My other brothers were good athletes. They were very good in basketball and football. But yeah, we were always active in those kinds of things growing up. And as everything that happens, Little League occurred 2 blocks down at the field. And so my father and the neighborhood fathers coached everybody. And, that went on in the summer. And it's not like it is today. It just went on in the summer. But I'll tell you, it was a fascinating life. But we always, quite seriously, we always went over to Butte or Anaconda a couple times in the summer, whether we wanted to or not, even as we got older. It was just kind of one of those mandatory things that later in life we groused about, but it wasn't necessarily negotiable with my mother.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Well, with 5 kids, how did the family get around?
We always had new cars. I don't know how the hell Dad did it. I mean, maybe it was the insurance business that he figured out how to get new vehicles, but he would just pile them all in, and we would move around. Yeah, I mean, we only had 1 car. There weren't 2 or 3 cars as you see today. And by the way, in our world, at least with the Butte side, as I said, we would go there because my Butte relatives, some didn't have a car, some didn't have a phone at the time. And so once in a while we would go over there and bring the car over and haul their kids around to various places, but somehow we got around. I don't know how we did it. We only had 1 car.
Mm-hmm. I think that's funny.
Last weekend, I was down in Arizona because the Grizzly football team played Northern Arizona, and I ended up meeting up with a friend of mine that I've been friends with since 1st grade. He lives in Portland. He's very successful, has a concrete finishing business. It's a big company. I can almost tell you universally, the friends I grew up with in their own right are all successful. One's a managing editor at the Great Falls Tribune. One's a deputy attorney general. One's a author, not just Montana author, by the way, but a national author. I mean, it's really interesting to see how people in their own right became very successful. I don't think to this day that we take each other seriously because of titles, though. Mm-hmm. I think we take each other as either friends or neighborhood pals or high school, grade school pals. And we still refer to each other by the names we refer to as kids. I mean, people to this day call me Jimmy. I know exactly that they're from the neighborhood. They call my brother Danny. My sister to this day refers to herself in Montana as Kathleen Foley McCarthy. I mean, she can do that, but she calls herself Foley as much as she does her married name, McCarthy. So, I mean, the neighborhood was important to me. I still see people to this day, and almost instantly we catch up. Instantly.
What do you think that is? Besides stepping away from the Irish connections, what do you think that Montana connection does for people? Or where have you seen it kind of stand out?
Well, I think, I don't know that it's generational, but I do think neighborhoods are different, and so people are busy. Technology takes care of that to this day. People are busy because there's more activities for kids and their parents, and that's not a criticism, it's just the way life goes. But when I was growing up in the neighborhood, and my cousins were growing up in Butte and Anaconda, many of the things we did didn't cost anything. Very few organized sports at the time, outside of school, and so we had to make our own fun. We had to interact and do things that were just in the neighborhood. Whether it be stickball or just hanging out. There weren't movies. We didn't have that kind of thing, and so we were obligated to make our own fun and appreciate the friendships that we had just for hanging out. So I don't think it's generational. I just think there's more things to do in the 21st century than there were, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What can you tell me about Kevin Shannon?
Kevin Shannon was a very dear friend of my father's, and somehow or another our families became close. But Kevin and my dad, I think, were involved in the insurance business, life insurance business, and that's where they first met. But they realized they had some common interest in terms of my mother being from Butte and my father being from Anaconda. Kevin has a couple of children that are special children, special kids. Well, they're adults now, and my father took a great interest in helping him with those issues when they were institutionalized. To this day, if I see Kevin, he always brings up things about my dad that I probably didn't know about. He's always very complimentary, and it's one of those things that I think in life, they didn't know each other when they were younger, but they became friends in an interesting way as they were older. And well, they didn't stay in touch via phone, but they would see one another regularly and have coffee or have soup or and talk about their families. And it was one of those things that was interesting for me as a kid growing up to watch, because I'm not sure I really understood the Irish connections at the time. I obviously do now, but I think it was really important. And I can tell you, Kevin, when my father passed away 5 years ago, Kevin came over to the funeral service, and I'll bet to this day he goes to very few of them. And he was in his own way emotional about it, because it was a passing of a generation of some of his friends of his generation that were no longer there. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can remember vividly the day after the day of the service that he was not the same Kevin Shannon, because I think he was reflecting on his life and the life of his pals that were going by the wayside.
And can you just tell us a little bit about him himself, what he's...
You know, I mean, from my memory of Kevin, he's been involved with New York Life Insurance forever. And, you know, I think he did okay with it, but I think he was always, in my experience, always looking out for the underdog. It wasn't that he did things at the expense of people who were successful, but he wanted people to get an extra step forward. And he was always careful to mention that somebody needed a lift, or somebody needed a few bucks, or somebody needed a van, or somebody needed a washing machine, and those are the conversations I remember him having with my father. And the interesting thing about it is, with somebody like Kevin Shannon, is I'm convinced he did most of that anonymously, and probably most people don't know what he did to help others out. Not because of his situation, or not because he had the wherewithal to do it. It just was the right thing to do. And I remember those conversations, kind of listening to them from afar, to hear Kevin and my father talking. And you know, I don't know whatever came out of them, but I'll bet they helped a heck of a lot of people when they needed a helping hand. And I don't think Kevin's ever forgot that. I mean, to this day, I don't think he's forgot that.
That's cool. That's great. Do you what do you know about Joe
Reber? You know, Joe Reber, I mean, his family, his kids were slightly older than me, most of them, and so his family, sons and daughters, interacted a little bit with my older brother and sister. But you know, my memory of Joe Reber was when I was growing up, and I do remember this even as a 7-8-year-old in 1960. He brought then Senator John Kennedy to Helena, and had a little function over at his house. Over on the west side of Helena, and I don't recall if my mother and father went there. I'm not sure they were at that level, but you know, after that you begin to find out about who this man was, and he really is a person who started out with zero as a paper boy, selling papers, by the way, in front of the Finland Hotel, which he ended up owning one day, and made himself into you know, a very successful businessman without even a college or a high school degree. And the University of Montana gave him an honorary doctorate some years ago before I came here, but Joe was a guy who worked hard, got some contracts that my history of it is, you know, installing missile silos around the country, including Montana, at a time when they were putting them all in, and he did well by that. And so this became this big company where he had his own plane, and he had multiple people working for him. But politically, I mean, I've always been intrigued by this, even up till a month or so before he passed away, when I went and saw him out at the home here in Missoula. He could recall vividly people he interacted with, from John Kennedy to Bill Clinton. And he was a huge Democrat and never was shy about telling elected officials what they should do or shouldn't do. And a big supporter. He always understood that you know, progressives were better off than conservatives. I don't say that in a bad way. He just came from a different world. And even up till the month before he passed away, he gave me his book and signed it. And I didn't read it, by the way, until I got in the car, and it really just took my breath away. He signed it to me, but he talked about how good of a guy my dad was. And they probably had their ups and downs in life. I don't know. I mean, my dad was on city council and mayor, so they probably had something they went back and forth on. but he always remembered my mom and dad and who they were and who the kids were, and it was just fascinating to talk to him because he would recall vividly not only his life, but the elected officials he interacted with. And at one point he was in the state senate, and I think he was appointed, if I recall correctly. And frankly, because of Joe Reber, and others can say what they want about this and take credit for it, the two-year college system, the two-year College of Technology system, was established in Montana. He's the one who created that, and I think he writes about it in his book. But people should be proud of going into two-year systems and getting, a two-year associate degree or getting a certificate for welding. He's the one who created that. Because of where he came from, by the way. Because he was a plumber. And he always used to remind me of that when I came back to university. Don't let people forget about it. I'm like, well, I won't. Don't worry, Joe. I'm not going to let people forget. So there you go, Joe. I'm just reminding him one more time.
I'll let him get away with this one, huh? Let's put out... Can you call Aunt Noni?
Aunt Noni?
Aunt Noni, yes.
Well, my mother had a great aunt in Ireland, which her kids are still around in Ireland and still have some ownership with a family home over there. But my Aunt Noni came to the United States and came to Butte and Helena a couple of times when I was younger. I don't remember her much coming when I was older. But every year, like clockwork, she would send cards to the kids and the family and to my mother, along with candy, which probably was 2 months old at the time, because however they shipped it at the time, there wasn't FedEx or UPS, there wasn't any of that. I remember how my mother would always be very emotional about that, because it was that connection back to not only Butte but back to Ireland, and she would always talk to us about, I'd like you to have some of this candy because it's from Ireland. I'm not sure, by the way, it made any difference, but we'd always choke it down. And then we lost touch after my mother got sick and passed away, and so I haven't been in touch with Noni or excuse me, her kids in probably the last decade or so. But I think some of my siblings have. But that was always our connection to Ireland. That at Christmas or on occasion of another holiday or so, we get a package with a note to my mother and the kids, in terrible handwriting. So I don't really know much more about her than that. But the good news is my mother and father, particularly my mother, years before she got sick, had the opportunity to go to Ireland, go to the family homestead, see Aunt Noni, see her great aunt, see some of her second, third cousins, and be at the family home and stay overnight there. That does my heart good.
What was her response to that? Did you get to talk with her about that trip?
Well, she not much. She complained about it being cold in the house because they still heated with peat moss. She complained about the stink, and she complained that they made Mom and Dad pay for everything when they went out to dinner. Which I thought, well, that doesn't matter. I mean, that's not unusual. That happens to this day. But she didn't really talk much about it because I don't know why. She just, it was important to her that she went. Important to my father, kind of less so. And she was proud of it, but she didn't really talk. Had lots of pictures. Didn't really talk about it much. I don't know why that is. I really don't.
That's interesting.
And had the heat on when I left because I was cold. You're on your bike, holy mackerel.
Oh, that's fine. I just live a few blocks away.
Wakes you up.
Yeah, it definitely. But
Wakes you up.
I was after that. So that's always fun.
Okay, we're good. How are we doing on time for you?
Good. Probably another 10 minutes.
Okay, sure thing.
If that works for you guys.
No, that's great. Yeah, we'll give you some
that's
time.
Perfect.
Let's hear you back on.
I'm good to go.
Okay. Just kind of a few more things here, and then I'd love to kind of give you a chance to just kind of discuss, if you want to kind of keep that in mind. But did your family have any sayings at all? Any kind of very Irishy things that would seem to happen you remember or can connect with?
I don't know if this is an Irish thing, but it is a Butte thing. I can tell you this. My mother, growing up, and even as adults, when we would as kids start to lip off or have some challenges in terms of being knuckleheads or whatever, she had this saying, which I've heard from others over in Butte, not just in the Irish world, but mostly in the Irish world, that she would say, she would wait for us to give our I'm sorries and things like that, and she would always say something to the effect of, I have a pocket full of those I'm sorries. And so let me be self-reflective on your behalf. And when that would happen, I mean, literally, we'd be like, oh my God. I mean, it's going to be worse than a beating, because you're not going to get a beating. Your mother's going to give you a talking to, whether you're a child or an adult. And third, now you've hurt her. And by the way, I don't know that that was universal to her, because I've heard it from my buddies in Butte. Art Noonan's father used to say it once in a while. I hear my cousins say it kind of in different formats once in a while, but and there's probably a few others, but that's one I vividly remember, because even as an adult it came up. And I use it once in a while with students when they come in here and they start to give me some answers that I'm like, really, I'm not buying it. And I'll say that, and 7 times out of 10 they'll be like, I'm not sure what that means, but it's not good, whatever it is. And that's the one I remember the most. I mean, there's a typical Butte things that I can't really say because I'm not from Butte, so people would be offended. You know, G-Chet, you know, those kinds of things that are Butte sayings that aren't me. I mean, I didn't hear them that much except when I went to Butte or Anaconda. Mm-hmm. But the one I just told you about my mother, I vividly remember that. Growing up, I vividly remember that.
What was you talked about what your cousins thought of you guys from Helena. What was your view of these rambunctious?
Oh, hell, we were afraid of them.
Yeah.
By the way, most of them were girls. I mean, you know, so we'd go over there, I'm not exaggerating, we'd go over there and roll out of the car, and within a minute, they'd be taking us to the ground and having a little conversation. They were tough, still are today. I'm kind of afraid of them a little bit today, to this day. But, you know, they're still loyal on both sides of the family. We still interact when we see one another and catch up a little bit and find out where our cousins are or their siblings. You know, do we stay in touch a bunch? No. And various members of my family stay in touch with them more than others. But oh yeah, hell yeah, we were afraid of them. Yeah, and you know how it is in that day and age. My mother and father say, get out there and have at it with them, and I'd be like, geez, I just took a beating yesterday. I don't need another one. Yeah, no, we were afraid of them. I probably still am to this day.
That's great. Do you have any food, you know, either Irish food or just particular kind of food? What was your kind of culinary life growing up?
You know, that's it. I'm glad you asked that question. I was thinking about that. So when I was growing up, we ate no vegetables other than out of a can, ever, never fresh. I don't ever remember it. My mother were alive today, she'd probably kick my butt, but I don't ever remember it. I don't remember that we ever ate any salad, because either my father or my mother didn't like salad. So we never, you know how to this day you get a salad? That never happened. So we had Jell-O. That was our salad, you know, that had fruit in it or something, which to this day I look at and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not eating that. There was always meat of some sort. There was Spam, which even before my father passed away, he ate it like it was hot dogs with fried Spam with cheese, and I just can't even imagine it. And then, you know, even not during Lent, we ate fish on Fridays, or tuna fish, or tuna casserole. And it to this day, I can't stand even hearing about it, thinking about it. But it was pretty black and white, pretty meat, some potato, some canned vegetable. I mean, in fact, I didn't eat a fresh vegetable in my life. I can't speak to my brothers and sisters until I went to college away. I didn't know what they were. They had Brussels sprouts. I didn't know what it was. I'd never seen them. So yeah, it was pretty basic stuff. Pretty basic stuff. I mean, one time when I was in high school, my dad said to me after a sporting event, "Well, would you like some fruit or something?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like some fruit. I'd absolutely like some." He goes to the store and came back with a brown paper bag. I opened it up. It was a can of fruit cocktail, which to this day I wouldn't eat. So they just had a different view of it, different view of life. I mean, they really did. But never a salad, never any vegetable except in a can, and always some fish or tuna or something on Fridays, whether it was Lent or not, which we used to complain about outside of Lent, and my mother would have none of it. We still ate fish sticks, awful, tuna casserole, not good, or some other element that was fish related.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. What about on holidays or during Lent? Was there any big changes?
No big changes, really. I mean, during Lent, you know, we because we, at least the older kids, went to Catholic school, so during Lent you went to church quite often. I don't remember every day, but maybe it was that. You know, certainly on Fridays. And then at holidays, particularly at Easter, you would be involved Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and whatever the events are that were going on in the church. All of us growing up were active in altar boys. At the time, young girls couldn't become altar, whatever they call them today. I don't know what they call them today. Helpers, I guess. And so we would serve Mass early in the morning usually, but holidays were usually based around whatever's going on at the church, and that kind of drove our schedule. Midnight Mass on Christmas, we always went. My father was a member of the Knights of Columbus, and so they were always active at Midnight Mass with their unis and swords and hats and all that, which my little brother's involved with the Knights of Columbus. I hope he's not wearing those uniforms, but maybe he is. But I don't remember thinking anything specifically with food, really, as you asked. I think it was pretty standard.
And was there anything when you'd get together with the family in Butte, any kind of food stuff would?
Well, even as young kids, and to this day it's the same. We'd go to Butte, and either one of two things would come up for one of the meals: either pork chop sandwiches that we would make or go get, or pasties, which we either made or went and picked them up. And to this day, if I go to Butte, I'll go get a pork chop sandwich, if I can do it. To this day, every couple of months, thank God in Missoula they have a place, Lisa's Pasties, where they're from Butte, by the way. We go get pasties and I have them. I am a little concerned, though, that they now make vegetarian pasties, so I'm not sure how that fits. It wouldn't have fit back then, but that was always the standard. One of those two items we'd have when we went to Butte. Anaconda was more pasties, not pork chop sandwiches. But still, pretty basic food. I don't remember much elaborate. I don't remember much going out to dinner with cousins and all that. We always did it at home. I don't remember that much.
Mm-hmm. It's fun. Pasties. Vegetarian pasties. Do you have anything of your folks? Any mementos or keepsakes or anything that you kind of prize or?
I think. When my mother and father passed away with 5 kids, we were very careful about, where military medals went, where wedding rings went, where Bibles and rosaries went, so that every child had some of that. But I think the thing that we did is, in my case too, in terms of mementos, I ended up with a jacket that my father had after he'd gone to Carroll, and it wasn't a letter jacket, but it was a jacket that had Carroll College on it, and he used to wear it all the time. And I don't ever wear it, but when I got it, and I'll never forget this, in fact, this is what probably had as much to do with his death as anything. He had a pack of smokes in the cigarette, or a pack of smokes in the pocket that he probably went and put it on, went outside and had a smoke once in a while. And, I left him in there. Just because I'm not going to wear the coat, so I'm just leave them in there, and once in a while I'll go check on it. And all the rest of the kids have some other memento or a piece of furniture or a painting or things like that. But here's the interesting thing my mother did that probably isn't unique of that generation. When my mother passed away, my father passed away, she had spent the latter part of her life before she got sick putting things in boxes by name. So when she passed away, I had, for example, in my case, spelling bee trophies, which is a little odd because I can't spell today very well. We have spell check on our computer. Mementos from Cub Scouts, photos from Cub Scouts, and she segregated those out by each child. And so we got them all at once. They were all personal, but she had taken the time to do all that, and more importantly, saved it all. She saved boxes of stuff. And so it was kind of cool to get them all. When she passed away, my father passed away. I still have them.
What was going through that box for the first time like?
It was, first of all, it was pretty cool that she saved stuff that I, frankly, had forgotten about. That she actually saved letters that I wrote to her when I went to, camp. Legendary Lodge Camp, which is the Catholic youth camp. She saved that stuff. So it was kind of fun to go through and be reminded of kind of where you were and where you're at today. But I think more importantly, it allows us the opportunity to pass it along to others. And, I don't think she was unique in her generation in terms of keeping that stuff and giving it back to us later. I don't think any of us knew that she kept it all. But I think that generation was more thoughtful about, I want to be sure that my kids have, memories of their life growing up. Not so much about their parents, but what they did. And she kept cards and birthday cards I sent to her. And it wasn't unique. She did that for all my siblings. But it was pretty cool to go through. I mean, I still have them all in a box. And quite literally to this day, every once in a while we all get down. We all have bad days. Not all the time, but I'll go look through it. Because it brings you back. And it brings you back in a place that is not secure. It just brings you back that, tells you we were pretty lucky in the life we've had so far. And I still do that once in a while.
What it's like, or the importance of being of Irish heritage in Montana to somebody that wasn't from here or didn't really know about the Butte connection or didn't know any of those kind of things. What kind of points would you maybe bring up?
I think I would make 2 or 3 points, probably in this order. I think first of all that it doesn't take very long to meet somebody in Montana who has very strong Irish heritage and grew up in not just Anaconda and Butte, but in places where their families made sure they maintain that heritage, and be able to catch up very quickly about common people common businesses you interact with, and old stories about people that you may have heard before or need to be reminded of. I mean, it doesn't take very long. And to this day, if I go to Butte or if I go to Anaconda, after they qualify that your family's from there, they'll start to refer to you as, well, this is Jim Foley from Anaconda, if you're in Anaconda. And every once in a while, I don't want to overstate this, they'll say, you're from Butte. And you know what? I mean, I grew up in Helena, but that's pretty interesting. I think that's unique. And it doesn't take long for people to have a common interest or a common friend or a common business or a common something they did in sports. And it just happened to me last night at a reception I was at, where somebody knew my brother from the Catholic school days. I'd never met this person before. Related stories about my older brother that I'd never heard. Some not good, by the way. So I think that's number one. I think number two, I don't, and we've chatted about this a little bit, I don't think it ever hurts to be reminded about who you are and how you got to where you're at whatever that level is. And I think in the Irish world, in the Montana Irish world, every once in a while it's good to reflect on that and think about it, because in my case, many of the opportunities I have had, and I feel very lucky, was because of friends I had that were friends of my parents or acquaintances of my relatives, and many of the opportunities I've had has been because of that. And I don't take that lightly. I really don't. To this day, I don't take it lightly. On the campus here, I'm fortunate to be here, but to this day, I can catch up with people who are involved with Irish studies and in 30 seconds find out what's going on in the Irish world in Boston and other places. And I'm not sure that really matters to most people, but it's pretty unique for me, and probably would be for others. So that's what I think.
That's great. So we don't want to take up too much more of your time. Is there, just kind of knowing about the project, is there anything else you want to share? Anything you've been
I think what I would say about the project, I think it's in some ways long overdue. But it isn't just about Missoula, and it isn't just about Butte or Anaconda. It's about the West and about Montana and how the Irish came here and the difference they made in people's lives. Probably to this day, not at the expense of other cultures, by the way, but I think it's a valuable project to take the Irish elders, if I may say that, and have them tell their stories so we don't lose track of them for generation after generation. And I think for folks in my generation and even younger, I think it's important for us to remember others that were involved in the struggle early on to get jobs and get notoriety, and remember that a little bit. And it's not in a spiritual way necessarily, but in a way that thanks them in your own way and says, good for you. We're better off because you all entered our life sometime along the way. So. That's what I think.
Great. All righty. Well, good. Well, thank you so much.